On a bitter January morning in 1991, in the quiet town of Seymour, Connecticut, a young woman named Kathleen Flynn stepped out of her modest apartment on Church Street to run errands she would never complete. She was 23 years old, a recent college graduate working part-time at the local library while applying to graduate schools. She had strawberry blonde hair that caught the light, a quick smile, and a journal she kept faithfully every night before bed. At approximately 9:15 that morning, she told her roommate she would be back within the hour. By nightfall, every law enforcement agency in the Naugatuck Valley was searching for her. By week's end, the investigation would focus not on a stranger, but on someone she trusted completely. And for 33 years, the truth would remain locked behind a wall of silence that only one person could break. What happened to Kathleen Flynn on that frozen morning, and why did it take more than 3 decades for the truth to finally surface? Seymour, Connecticut sits in the Naugatuck River Valley, a town of 15,000 souls tucked between rolling hills that turned skeletal in winter. In 1991, it was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where everyone knew the crossing guard's name, where the biggest news was usually the high school basketball scores. Main Street ran through the center of town like a spine, lined with family-owned shops that had weathered generations. The Flynn family had lived there for 40 years, ever since Kathleen's grandparents had moved from Boston seeking quieter lives. Kathleen shared a second-floor apartment on Church Street with her college roommate, Jennifer Morrison. The building was a converted Victorian, painted pale yellow with white trim, its wooden stairs creaking with age and history. Their apartment faced east, catching the morning light through windows that rattled slightly when trucks passed below. Inside, the space was neat but lived in. Textbooks stacked on the coffee table, photographs pinned to a corkboard in the kitchen. A small television that picked up 3 channels clearly and 2 more if you adjusted the antenna just right. January 16, 1991, dawned cold and crystalline. The temperature hovered at 18 degrees, and the sky held that pale, washed-out quality that promises no warmth. Kathleen woke at 7:30, as she did every Wednesday. Jennifer heard her in the shower, heard the familiar sounds of morning routine. The hair dryer, the opening and closing of drawers, the kettle whistling on the stove. They ate breakfast together at the small kitchen table, oatmeal and coffee, talking about nothing important. Jennifer had an 8 o'clock shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide. Kathleen planned to deposit her paycheck at the bank, pick up dry cleaning, and stop by the post office to mail graduate school applications. "I'll be back by 10:30, Kathleen said, pulling on her navy wool coat, the one with the missing button on the left cuff. She wound a red scarf around her neck, tucked her wallet into her purse, a brown leather bag her mother had given her for Christmas. She grabbed her car keys from the hook by the door. "Want me to pick up milk on my way home?" Jennifer asked, clearing their breakfast dishes. "No need." "I'll get it," Kathleen smiled, touched the doorframe once, a habit, a small superstition, and descended the stairs. Jennifer heard the building's front door close. She heard Kathleen's car start in the parking lot behind the building, heard it pull away. She returned to washing dishes, unaware that those would be the last ordinary sounds of the morning. The bank opened at 9 o'clock. Kathleen's name appeared on the transaction log at 9:07, a deposit of $342, her paycheck from 2 weeks at the library. The teller, Mrs. Chen, remembered her clearly. She seemed normal, she would later tell investigators. Happy even. She mentioned something about graduate school, about hoping to study literature. She thanked me and left through the main entrance. The dry cleaner was 2 blocks away. Kathleen arrived at 9:15, according to the timestamp on the receipt found later in her car. She picked up 2 blouses and a pair of dress pants. The owner, Mr. Kowalski, wrapped them in plastic and stapled the receipt to the hanger. She was in a hurry, he recalled. Not rude, just efficient. She said she had one more stop to make. The post office was another 3 blocks on the corner of Main and Elm. This is where the timeline fractures. This is where the ordinary morning dissolved into something else entirely. The post office clerk did not remember seeing Kathleen. The surveillance camera, a single unit aimed at the counter, showed no footage of her. But her car was found in the post office parking lot at 6:30 that evening, discovered by a postal worker leaving his shift. The car was locked. The dry cleaning lay across the back seat, still in plastic. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside, containing her identification and $73 in cash. The keys were not in the ignition. They were not in the car at all. By 7 o'clock, Jennifer had called Kathleen's parents. By 7:30, they had called the police. By 8 o'clock, officers were at the post office, examining the vehicle, taking photographs in the harsh glare of their flashlights. The car doors showed no signs of forced entry. There were no scratches on the locks, no broken windows. The interior was undisturbed except for one detail that made the responding officer pause. Kathleen's red scarf, the one she had been wearing that morning, lay on the driver's seat, loosely folded. Clear as throat, the search began immediately. Seymour Police Department called in assistance from surrounding towns. By midnight, 40 officers were combing the area around the post office, flashlights cutting through the darkness, voices calling Kathleen's name into the frozen night. They searched the nearby woods, the riverbank, the alleyways behind Main Street. They knocked on doors, waking residents, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. Most had not. One elderly man thought he heard a car door slam around 9:30 that morning, but he could not be certain. Another woman reported seeing a figure in a dark coat near the post office around that time, but her description was vague, unhelpful. The temperature dropped to 12 degrees. The search continued through the night. Officers found nothing, no footprints in the frozen ground, no signs of disturbance. No trace of Kathleen Flynn beyond her abandoned car, sitting silent in the parking lot like a question no one could answer. Part 2. The investigation. Dawn broke gray and bitter over Seymour on January 17th. The search expanded. State police arrived with tracking dogs. Volunteers from the community gathered at the fire station, organizing into teams. The local newspaper, the Valley Sentinel, ran Kathleen's photograph on the front page, her college graduation picture, cap and gown, that bright smile. By noon, 200 people were searching. They walked shoulder to shoulder through fields, through the wooded areas along the Naugatuck River, through abandoned buildings and storage facilities. They distributed flyers throughout the valley, stapling them to telephone poles, taping them in shop windows. Kathleen's parents, Robert and Ellen Flynn, stood in the cold outside the police station, speaking to television cameras. Ellen clutched a photograph of her daughter. "If anyone knows anything, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please help us bring her home." Robert stood beside her, silent, his jaw tight, his eyes red from sleeplessness and grief. The investigation focused initially on strangers, on the possibility of random violence. Detectives reviewed reports of suspicious vehicles, checked the whereabouts of registered individuals with certain histories. They interviewed every business owner on Main Street, every employee at the post office, every customer who had been in the area that morning. The leads went nowhere. Seymour was a small town. Strangers were noticed. No one had seen anyone who did not belong. On the third day, detectives turned their attention to those closest to Kathleen. They interviewed her friends, her co-workers at the library, her former professors. They interviewed Jennifer Morrison multiple times, walking through the morning's events repeatedly, searching for inconsistencies. There were none. Jennifer's timeline matched every verifiable fact. She had clocked in at the hospital at 8:15. Multiple colleagues confirmed her presence throughout her shift. Then the detectives interviewed Daniel Mercer. Daniel was 26 years old, a mechanic at the auto repair shop on Route 8. He had been dating Kathleen for 8 months. They had met at a friend's barbecue the previous spring, begun dating casually, then more seriously. By December, they were discussing moving in together, making plans for the future. Daniel was tall and quiet, with calloused hands and a tendency to speak slowly, choosing his words carefully. Those who knew him said he was reliable, hardworking, a little reserved but kind. He lived in a small house on Hickory Lane, a rental property with peeling paint and a yard that needed attention. Detectives arrived at his home on January 19th. Daniel answered the door in work clothes, grease under his fingernails. He invited them in without hesitation. The house was sparse. Second-hand furniture, dishes in the sink, a television playing with the sound muted. They sat in his living room and he answered their questions calmly. "When did you last see Kathleen?" Detective Sarah Brennan asked, her notebook open on her lap. "Tuesday night, the 15th. We had dinner at her apartment. I left around 9:30. How did she seem?" "Normal, happy. We talked about her graduate school applications. She was excited." His voice was steady, his hands resting on his knees. "And Wednesday morning, did you speak to her?" "No, I was at work. My shift started at 7. "Can anyone verify that?" "My boss, coworkers. We had 3 cars in that morning. I was there all day." Detective Brennan made notes. Her partner, Detective Frank Costa, walked slowly around the room, observing. "Do you own any other vehicles besides the truck outside?" he asked. "No, just the Ford." "Does Kathleen have a key to your house?" "Yes." "Do you have a key to her apartment?" "No, she offered, but I never needed one." The interview lasted 40 minutes. Daniel answered every question without pause, without defensiveness. When they asked if he would take a polygraph examination, he agreed immediately. When they asked if they could search his house, he signed the consent form without reading it. "I just want to help find her," he said. The polygraph was administered on January 21st. The examiner noted that Daniel showed no deception indicators on key questions. The search of his house revealed nothing of investigative value. His work alibi checked out completely. He had clocked in at 6:58 on Wednesday morning, clocked out at 5:30 that evening. Multiple coworkers confirmed his presence throughout the day. Clear's throat, but those who worked closely with the investigation began to notice small things. Inconsistencies too minor to be called evidence, too persistent to be ignored. Daniel's demeanor never changed. While Kathleen's family wept publicly, while her friends organized candlelight vigils, while the entire town seemed to hold its breath in collective anguish, Daniel remained calm, composed. When investigators asked him to appear at a press conference, to make a public appeal for information, he agreed without emotion. He stood at the microphone and read from a prepared statement, his voice steady, his face neutral. "If anyone knows where Kathleen is, please come forward," he said. He did not cry. He did not plead. He delivered the words and stepped back from the podium. "It struck me as odd," Detective Brennan would write in her notes. "Not evidence of guilt, but an absence of the distress we typically see in loved ones of missing persons. He was too controlled." Then there were the details that did not quite align. Daniel said he had last seen Kathleen on Tuesday night, leaving her apartment at 9:30. But a neighbor in Kathleen's building, Mr. Tavers, told police he saw Daniel's truck parked behind the building at 11 o'clock Tuesday night. He was certain of the time because he had just finished watching the news. He was certain of the truck because he recognized it, an older Ford with a distinctive dent in the passenger door. When confronted with this discrepancy, Daniel paused, the first time investigators saw him hesitate. "I must have remembered wrong," he said finally. Maybe I left closer to 11. The evening runs together in my mind now. There was also the matter of the scarf. Kathleen had been wearing her red scarf when she left her apartment. Jennifer was certain of this. Mrs. Chen at the bank thought she remembered seeing it, but the scarf was found folded on the driver's seat of Kathleen's car. Not dropped, not tangled, folded. As if someone had removed it carefully and placed it there deliberately. Investigators searched the woods near Daniel's house. They brought cadaver dogs. They excavated a section of his backyard where the ground appeared disturbed, though Daniel explained he had been planning to plant a garden in the spring. They found nothing. They searched his truck, examining it with luminol for traces of biological material. The tests came back negative. Weeks passed. The investigation consumed hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars in resources. Tips poured in from across the state, across the country. People reported seeing someone who looked like Kathleen in New Haven, in Hartford, in Massachusetts. Every lead was pursued. Everyone led nowhere. By March, the search teams had scaled back. By April, the daily press conferences stopped. By summer, the case was no longer on the front page of the Valley Sentinel. It moved inside to page 3, then page 7, then appeared only occasionally, usually on the anniversary of Kathleen's disappearance. The file remained open, but the active investigation slowed, then stopped. Detectives moved on to other cases. The town returned to its rhythms. And Kathleen Flynn became one more name in the registry of the missing. One more face on a poster that faded in the sun. One more family waiting for answers that never came. Part 3. The silence 18 months after Kathleen vanished, Daniel Mercer moved. Not far, just to the next town over, a small apartment in Darby. He told his landlord he needed a fresh start, needed to be away from the memories. His friends understood. His family supported the decision. Those who knew him casually did not question it. Those who knew him better wondered quietly among themselves but said nothing aloud. Robert and Ellen Flynn stayed in Seymour. They could not leave. To leave would be to abandon the possibility that Kathleen might find her way home, might call the number they had maintained for years, might walk through the door one evening as if no time had passed. They kept her room exactly as she had left it, her books on the shelf, her clothes in the closet. The journal on her nightstand, the last entry dated January 15, 1991, applied to 3 more schools today, feeling hopeful. Ellen stopped sleeping through the night. She would wake at 2, 3 in the morning and wander the house, checking the locks, looking out windows at the empty street. Robert threw himself into work, taking extra shifts at the factory, coming home exhausted, barely speaking. They existed beside each other, but the grief had opened a chasm between them that neither knew how to cross. Jennifer Morrison finished her nursing degree and moved to Boston. She could not bear to stay in Seymour, could not walk past their old apartment without seeing Kathleen descending those stairs, touching the doorframe, smiling. She called Ellen every month on the 16th, and they would talk for a few minutes about nothing important, both of them avoiding the subject that consumed them. Both of them, knowing the other, was thinking of nothing else. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, you understand the particular torture of uncertainty. It is not the same as grief for the dead, where there is finality, ritual, a grave to visit. It is a wound that never closes, fed by the constant possibility that you are wrong, that the person you doubt is innocent, that your suspicion is a betrayal. By 1995, Daniel had married. Her name was Christine Palmer, a receptionist at a dental office in Darby. They met at a coffee shop, began dating after 6 months, married quickly in a small ceremony at Town Hall. Christine knew about Kathleen. Daniel had told her on their 3rd date, his voice quiet, his eyes distant. "I was with someone who disappeared," he said. "The police investigated me." They found nothing because there was nothing to find. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me. Christine believed him. Why would she not? He was gentle with her, attentive, employed. He paid his bills on time and remembered her birthday. He had been cleared by the police. The case had gone cold not because of insufficient evidence against him, but because there was no evidence at all pointing anywhere. They had a daughter in 1997. They named her Emma. Daniel was a devoted father, by all accounts. He worked long hours at the repair shop, came home tired but always made time to read Emma bedtime stories, to push her on the swing set he installed in their small backyard. Christine worked part-time and managed the household. From the outside, they appeared to be an ordinary family, navigating the ordinary challenges of young parenthood and modest income. But there were moments, small fissures in the facade, that Christine would later recall with a cold, retrospective clarity. Daniel did not like Emma to play in the yard unsupervised. Even when she was 8, 9 years old, he insisted on being outside with her, watching. He never explained why. Christine thought it was normal parental protectiveness, perhaps intensified by his experience with Kathleen's disappearance. He never spoke about Kathleen unless asked directly. And when he did, his answers were brief, factual, devoid of emotion. "We dated, she disappeared, I don't know what happened to her." No speculation, no theories. No lingering grief or unanswered questions. Just a flat statement of fact, delivered and then closed. In the summer of 2003, Emma drew a picture in school. She was 6 years old in first grade. The assignment was to draw her family. She drew 3 figures, her mother, herself, and her father. In the corner of the page, separate from the others, she drew a 4th figure, a woman with yellow hair. When her teacher asked who it was, Emma said, "The lady in the garage." The teacher, Mrs. Holloway, was confused. "What lady?" "The one Daddy told me not to tell about." Mrs. Holloway felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. She asked more questions, but Emma grew quiet, then changed the subject. After class, Mrs. Holloway contacted the school counselor. The counselor spoke with Emma, gently, carefully. Emma repeated the statement. There was a lady in the garage, but Daddy said it was a secret. The school contacted Christine. Christine confronted Daniel that evening after Emma had gone to bed. "What is she talking about?" Christine demanded, the drawing in her hand. Daniel looked at it for a long moment, then he shook his head slowly. "I don't know, kids make up stories. You know how her imagination runs. She said you told her not to tell." "I never said that. Maybe she heard something at school, got confused." His voice was calm, reasonable. "You're not seriously questioning me about a child's drawing?" Christine wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. They had a life together, a daughter, a mortgage. To doubt him was to doubt the foundation of everything she had built, so she accepted his explanation. She put the drawing away in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But the doubt, once planted, began to grow. She noticed other things. The way Daniel would sometimes wake in the night, drenched in sweat, gasping. The way he avoided certain streets in Seymour when they had to drive through. The way his jaw would tighten when Kathleen Flynn's name appeared in the news on anniversaries of her disappearance. By 2010, their marriage was fracturing under the weight of unspoken suspicions. They argued over small things, money, household chores, parenting decisions. But beneath every argument was the larger, unnameable question. Christine had begun to resent him, though she could not articulate why. Daniel grew more withdrawn, spending longer hours at work, coming home and going directly to the garage, where he would tinker with car engines until late into the night. In October 2010, Christine asked for a separation. Daniel moved out without protest. They agreed to share custody of Emma. They told her it was an amicable split, that they still cared about each other, that nothing would change for her. Children always sense the lie beneath such reassurances. For those who have ever lived with a secret so large it shapes every breath, every interaction, every moment of silence, you understand that it is both a burden and a strange kind of companion. It becomes part of you. You learn to carry it. You learn to function with its weight, and you begin to believe, perhaps, that you can carry it forever. Daniel lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Ansonia. He saw Emma every other weekend. He continued working at the repair shop. He dated occasionally, never seriously. He was 46 years old, and to anyone who knew him, he was simply a man aging into middle life with its ordinary disappointments and small routines. But in February 2024, the silence finally broke. Part 4. The revelation: Emma Mercer was 26 years old, working as a paralegal in Bridgeport, living in her own apartment, navigating her own life. She had struggled in her teenage years with anxiety, with nightmares she could not explain, with the persistent feeling that something was wrong in her family, though she could not name what. She had been in therapy since college, working through the residue of her parents' divorce, the vague unease that had colored her childhood. In January 2024, Emma's therapist suggested a technique called memory retrieval work, a process of exploring early memories that might be influencing her current emotional state. Emma agreed. During a session on February 6th, the therapist asked her to recall her earliest memories of her home, her neighborhood, her sense of safety as a child. Emma closed her eyes. She described the backyard, the swing set, the feeling of flying through the air while her father pushed her. Then she described the garage, dark, smelling of oil and metal. She described being 7 or 8 years old, retrieving a bicycle from the garage. She described seeing something in the corner beneath a tarp. "What did you see?" the therapist asked gently. Emma's hands began to tremble. "Something wrapped up. I remember lifting the edge of the tarp, just a little. I remember seeing." She stopped, her breathing quickened. "Take your time." "Hair. I remember seeing blonde hair, and I remember my father coming in behind me very quickly. He pulled me away. He said, 'Don't look at that, that's not for you. We don't talk about that.' And then he took me inside and gave me ice cream and we watched television." Emma opened her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. "I forgot that happened." "How did I forget that happened?" The therapist maintained her composure, though later she would describe feeling a cold certainty wash over her. "Emma, I need to ask you something important. Do you think what you saw was real?" "I don't know, maybe I imagined it. I was a child, but it felt real." "It feels real now. Would you be willing to speak to law enforcement about this?" Emma nodded slowly. Clear's throat. On February 12, 2024, Emma Mercer sat in an interview room at Connecticut State Police Headquarters in Meriden. Across from her sat Detective James Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of the Major Crimes Unit, and Detective Sarah Brennan, now a lieutenant, who had worked the original Kathleen Flynn case 3 decades earlier. Emma told them everything: the drawing from first grade, the memory recovered in therapy, the vague, persistent sense throughout her childhood that something was terribly wrong. "Your father never said anything explicit?" Sullivan asked. "No, but he kept me away from the garage. He was always tense when I went near it. And after my parents separated, my mother mentioned once that she had always wondered about the garage. She said my father spent so much time out there, and he never let her organize it or clean it. She said it was like his private space where no one else was allowed." Brennan leaned forward. "Where did your father live after the separation?" "A few different apartments. But he kept renting a storage unit. Unit 247 at Valley Storage on Route 8 in Darby. He's had it for years. I remember because I helped him move boxes into it once, and he was very specific about which boxes I could touch and which ones I couldn't." The detectives exchanged glances. 2 days later, armed with a search warrant, Connecticut State Police executed a search of Storage Unit 247 at Valley Storage. Daniel Mercer was at work when they arrived. The storage facility manager opened the unit with trembling hands, stepped back, and let the investigators enter. The unit was 10 feet by 10 feet, filled with boxes, old furniture, car parts. In the back corner, beneath a plastic tarp covered with years of dust, they found a large toolbox. Inside the toolbox, wrapped in heavy plastic, were skeletal remains. Forensic analysis would later confirm what investigators already suspected. The remains were those of Kathleen Flynn. Dental records provided definitive identification. The medical examiner determined cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull, evidence of strangulation. Time of death: consistent with January 16, 1991. Daniel Mercer was arrested on February 19, 2024, as he arrived for his shift at the repair shop. He was charged with intentional harm resulting in death, concealment of evidence, and providing false statements to investigators. He said nothing during the arrest. He requested an attorney. He was held without bail. The news broke like thunder across Connecticut. The Valley Sentinel ran the headline in 72-point font: "Cold Case SOLVED, Arrest Made in 1991 Disappearance." Television trucks lined the street outside the courthouse. Reporters interviewed everyone who had known Kathleen, everyone who had known Daniel, anyone willing to speak about the case that had haunted the valley for 33 years. Ellen Flynn, now 78 years old, stood before the cameras. "I knew," she said simply. "I always knew. I told them to look closer at him, but there was no evidence, no proof. And now my daughter has been gone for 33 years, and he has lived his life while she lay in a storage unit like discarded furniture." Her voice cracked. "At least now we can bring her home." Robert had passed away in 2015, never knowing what had happened to his daughter. Ellen planned a burial in Riverside Cemetery in Seymour, beside the plot she had purchased years earlier for herself and Robert. Christine Palmer, now Christine Lawson, remarried and living in Rhode Island, released a statement through her attorney. "I am devastated to learn the truth about the man I was married to. My heart breaks for Kathleen Flynn and her family. I am cooperating fully with investigators and support my daughter's decision to come forward." The trial was scheduled for September 2024. In July, facing overwhelming evidence, not just Emma's testimony, but forensic evidence, financial records showing years of storage unit payments, cell phone records placing him at the storage facility multiple times in the weeks before his arrest, Daniel's attorney negotiated a plea agreement. Daniel would plead guilty to manslaughter and concealment of evidence in exchange for a sentence of 25 years in a correctional facility. On August 15, 2024, Daniel Mercer stood before Judge Patricia Alvarez in New Haven Superior Court. The courtroom was packed. Kathleen's family sat in the front row. Emma sat with her mother far in the back, unwilling to look at her father. Judge Alvarez asked Daniel if he wished to make a statement. His attorney advised against it. Daniel nodded, understanding. Then he spoke anyway. "I was 26 years old," he said quietly. "We were arguing. She wanted to end the relationship. I didn't want to accept it. Things escalated. I didn't plan it. But when it was over, she was gone, and I panicked. I hid her. I told myself I would figure out what to do, and then days passed, and then weeks, and then it became impossible to admit what I'd done. I've lived with this for 33 years. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want her family to know I'm sorry." Judge Alvarez listened without expression. When he finished, she asked if he had anything else to say. He shook his head. "You took a young woman's life," Judge Alvarez said. "You stole 33 years from her family. You built a life for yourself while they suffered. You had numerous opportunities to come forward, to give them answers, to allow them to grieve properly. You chose your own comfort over their peace. Daniel Mercer, I sentence you to 25 years in a correctional facility, to be served without the possibility of early release. May you spend those years reflecting on the cost of your silence. The courtroom erupted in quiet weeping. Emma stood and walked out without looking back. Christine followed her. Ellen Flynn remained seated, staring at Daniel as officers led him away in handcuffs. He did not meet her eyes. Kathleen Flynn was buried on September 7, 2024, in Riverside Cemetery. More than 300 people attended. The eulogist read from her journal, from entries written in the months before her death. Thoughts about literature, hopes for the future. Observations about the world that were full of intelligence and humor and life. She saw beauty everywhere, the eulogist said, and she believed in the goodness of people. Let us honor her by holding fast to that belief, even when the world gives us reason to doubt. Closing the Kathleen Flynn case reminds us that truth is patient. It waits in storage units and buried memories. It waits in the conscience of the guilty and the persistence of the innocent. It waits for daughters who are brave enough to speak, for detectives who never close the file, for communities that refuse to forget. Somewhere tonight, someone is missing. Someone is waiting for answers. Someone is carrying the unbearable weight of not knowing. And somewhere, perhaps, is the person who knows exactly what happened, who has been silent for years, who believes that time and distance will protect them. This case says otherwise. This case says that silence, no matter how carefully maintained, eventually breaks. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share this episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.